So if you would, go with me to Nehemiah chapter 7. And we are going to, Lord willing, get through the entire chapter in one shot. And it's a short one. It's only 73 verses long. All right? And how long do y'all have? No, okay. Hey, as far as I'm concerned, the sun doesn't go down until, well, no, I'll let it go. All right. But we're going to Nehemiah chapter 7, and there's a lot of verses that I'm not going to read. The reason I'm not going to read them, I'm going to let you go back and read all the names, okay? You can go ahead and read them for yourself. But I will explain what's going on, but I'm not going to cover the reading of every single verse in Nehemiah chapter 7. Now, we have recently been looking at, from chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, those were all the evidences of those things in opposition to the work going on, to the building of the walls and the securing of the gates and basically just the rebuilding of the city itself for the sake of the people and the house of God that is contained within. And so there is external opposition that started, and then there was internal opposition that kind of added to the problems, and it had to be dealt with. Then once the internal got dealt with and the people got their hearts right with each other and everything was back on track, then the external opposition came in to an attack again, but in, as we said, a more covert way and a deceptive way, trying to use the guise of just conversation and a little bit of compromise, and with the idea that you can just come down for a moment and then we'll let you go back to do what you're doing. But as we said, when you come down from the work, when you come down from what God has you doing, when you step away from what you know God has you to do, the possibility of returning to it is very, very slim. And some people have, but they come, I say this, some people do come back from stepping away from the perfect will of God. Okay, so don't get me wrong. Sometimes people do come back and get back on track with the Lord and start serving Him again. But every single person who steps away for a moment of compromise or just a moment of distraction, and sometimes that moment is honestly years, but every time somebody comes back, if they do, those that come back always come back with scars and baggage. And what you find is they can't quite do the way they used to for the Lord because the scars hinder them. And they can't quite handle as much because the baggage they're carrying is already heavy enough in that figurative statement and mentality. The baggage is already weighing them down, and it kind of holds them back. It's like an anchor holding them back from just taking off with the Lord. But the scars become a hindrance in an area that really just, you ever notice that some scars can hinder mobility? Some things you're dealing with, something you would love to just jump in and do, but yet just not quite have the abilities you used to. And by the way, when scars or baggage, either way, keep in mind, those things are hindrances that are almost always brought back with somebody who has gotten away from the Lord for any length of time. And so it's not like getting away, well, if I come back, no harm, no foul. No, there will be harm. And you'll feel like it's been a foul ball in your life, all right? And so it is best to stay with the Lord. That's what Nehemiah said. I have a great work. There is the need of the work. Why should the work stop while I come down to you and get distracted? That's not going to happen. So we see that what Nehemiah did and his stand, and through what Nehemiah did at the end of chapter 6, we find that because of his resolve and focus, the completion of the walls was done in only 52 days. A massive undertaking accomplished in a miraculous amount of time. And that is because the one leading the charge refused to let himself get sidelined or sidetracked against that which was most important. So we come into chapter 7, and in chapter 7, what we find is there are 3 goals that Nehemiah has for Jerusalem. 3 simple goals that are very important for the people and the city. And those goals, I'll just give you these. If you want to write them down, and I'm just going to backtrack and kind of walk through it just a minute. But goal number 1 was he wanted to see it protected. All right, wanted to see the city protected. Goal number 2, he wanted to see it populated and prosperous. So, I mean, what good does it do if you protect something if it's empty? So it needs to have people, and then it needs to make sure that it's not just any people, but that those who are there, the city, the people, everything about it can prosper in the eyes of God and with the blessings of the Lord. So he wanted to see it protected, see it populated and prosperous. Then also, thirdly, he wanted to see it provided for, okay? Because prosperous is one thing, but there were going to be needs, going to be things that were, the provisions that were going to be needed along the way. And he wanted to make sure, his desire was that what the city turned into, it does not just go right back to that again. What they had just gotten away from, it didn't go right back to a habit of seeing the whole thing destroyed over time. It needed to be provided for so that the people and the city and the house of God, everything can continue with the blessings of God and keep pushing and pressing forward. So in those 3 areas, let me just give you these thoughts, all right? So the first one here, he wanted to see it protected. Verse 1 through verse number 3 kind of presents that to us. It says, "Now it came to pass when the wall was built, and I had set up the doors, and the porters and the singers and the Levites were appointed, that I gave my brother Hananiah and Hananiah, the ruler of the palace, charge over Jerusalem. For he was a faithful man and feared God above many." So there's 2 men mentioned here, whether in reading this, I go back and forth. Was he describing Hananiah or describing Hananiah when it came to there was a faithful man and feared God above many? As a whole, I'm just going to say yes. Because neither one of them would have been chosen without these qualities. Neither one of them would have been given the responsibility without knowing that they were men of character and faithfulness. And so, verse number 3, he goes on and says, "And I said unto them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun be hot. And while they stand by, let them shut the doors and bar them, and appoint watches of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, every one in his watch, and every one to be over against his house." So Nehemiah sets in place 2 individuals to help oversee the protection of the city. Now that it's been fortified, it needs to make sure, listen, may I say, it is great to dump finances into building and creating something wonderful for the Lord. But here's the thing. If that which is built and created is not properly maintained and protected, then you have wasted your entire focus and finance on building something you're not going to be a good steward of. And that's what Nehemiah is presenting here. It's not just enough to build the walls, but now that it's there, now that it's done, all right, I need a couple of individuals that are going to accomplish the responsibility of making sure that this city is protected the way it can be. It's going to require that they follow certain guidelines. It's going to require that they abide by certain mentalities of time frame and operation. It can't just be a fly-by-night or however you feel like doing it, but there needs to be some very direct and specific guidelines of how things are done for the protection of the people. And I'm not going to go into a whole rabbit chase on this one, but I will say the Bible talks about things being done decently and in order, and everything that is worth doing well and worth doing right. And in this case, he had two men that he chose to do the job, and he gave them instructions to follow, knowing that they had the character to do just that. Now, when he gave charge to Hananiah and Hananiah, you find that they are chosen above everyone else, and here is why. All right? First of all, the exhibiting of faithfulness towards God. There in verse number 2, at the very end it says, "For he was a faithful man." You find in the Bible, Samuel was chosen because of faithfulness. 1 Samuel 2:35, "And I will raise me up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever." And so there is a faithfulness for even Samuel. Then you have David. David was chosen because of faithfulness. In 1 Samuel 22, in verse number 14, "Then Ahimelech answered the king and said, Who is so faithful among all thy servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law, and goeth at thy bidding, and is honorable in thine house?" David was chosen and favored because of faithfulness. Paul told Timothy to choose men that were faithful. In 2 Timothy 2:2 says, "And these things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men, who shall be able to teach others also." In 1 Corinthians 4:2, we are told, "Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found," guess what? Faithful. One of the biggest problems in today's mentality of operation is we have people around the globe and in churches everywhere, and under the ministry, you might say, and looking to be a part of things that don't want faithfulness to be a requirement. I want to be involved, but don't tell me I have to be here faithfully. I want to be in charge, but don't tell me I have to show up to church faithfully. You know, I want to be the one to sit around and give my opinion and everybody listen to me and do exactly how I think it ought to be done, but I don't want to have to be here on a regular basis and be involved in things. I just want to give my opinion and people listen. I will tell you this much. Y'all ready? I do not go and look at who gives what. Okay? I don't do that. I know some preachers that do. I don't do that. Number one, it can really change your attitude towards people in a heartbeat. But here's what I will say. If there was one thing that I wish would not affect me as an individual and would not be a wrong thing to do, I wish we could do, I do wish that it would be completely normal and completely acceptable and give no problems to look and know who gives what on a regular basis. And here's why. You say, well, that's none of your business. I get that. Just let me finish. But here's why. Because when it comes time to make decisions about what we're going to do, if that was the case, those who do not give would have no say. You say, well, I'm a church member, but you invest nothing. If you invest nothing, go to some of these big companies that have investors. And when they have meetings about major decisions, you walk on in there as a nobody who gives nothing and does nothing, but you just, you buy some of their product every now and then, and you just walk on in there and tell them, I'm here to tell y'all what needs to be done around here. See how far that goes. Matter of fact, if you could sneak into the meeting, as soon as you start asking questions, you start opening up your mouth, eventually they're going to say, and who are you? And they find out that you are not an investor, you give nothing, you're a consumer, but you're not an investor. They're going to kick you out the door so fast, make your head spin. Why is that? Because it's real easy to want to have a say, but it's not proper to want to have a say in what happens when you have no skin in the game. Well, I go to church here. Well, I'm sure, I'm not trying to be ugly. This is a general across the board, not necessarily here as a whole. I'm sure the seat you sit on every single Sunday welcomes you and is happy that you came each service. But when you don't put anything in, you don't invest time, you don't invest talent, you don't invest money, you don't invest prayer, you don't invest anything, you consume. If there's one thing that I wish that could be done, we're not going to do it, but if it could be done, the one thing I would want more than anything else is the ability to know who should have a say and who shouldn't according to who invests. Now you say that, preacher, that sounds kind of mean. No, it actually sounds pretty standard to the way everything works in life, except for in the church. But listen, we're not going to change things, and I'm not trying to be ugly, but I am just trying to get across the point that faithfulness is a major, by the way, I don't have to know who gives. God already does. I don't have to know who invests. God already does. I don't have to know who faithfully walks with the Lord, who faithfully reads the Bible, who faithfully is involved in a continual walk with God. The Lord knows. And He's more than capable of handling whatever needs to be handled in His own time and His own way. But as a whole, faithfulness is required. The reason that those two men were chosen was because they were faithful. But the second reason that they were chosen was because they exhibited the fear of God. That fear of God, 2 Corinthians 7:1 says, having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. Just a reminder, I know I've said it before a little bit, but what is the fear of God or of the fear of the Lord? What is that ultimately? It is living in the constant reverential, or in other words, reverential awareness that everything I say, do, think, and even feel will be given account to before God. Knowing this, I walk in holy fear of a God that knows everything and who is the perfect judge, who will have to judge righteously according to what is right, no matter how much it hurts for that judgment to fall. I'm not going to go there, but you could go to Psalm 34, verse 11 through verse number 22, and that passage of Scripture will give a very, very vivid description of the fear of the Lord, or the fear of God. In Proverbs 19:23, it says, the fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall abide satisfied. He shall not be visited with evil. And it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen, but it's talking about the giving in to the temptation of things that we have got to fight against, this flesh. There is an ability to be successful in the fight against the flesh when I remember the fear of the Lord. It's a very encouraging deterrent. Then let me give you this. So he chose two men. Why? Because he wanted the city to be protected. He wanted the people to be protected. So he chose men that were faithful and knew how to properly fear the Lord. That way, their faithfulness means they won't shirk on the responsibilities, and the fear of God means they won't misuse their authority. Those two things hand in hand were very important. So the protection, then we see he wanted to see it populated and prosperous. This is the biggest amount of verses that I'm not reading. But it does go down in verse number 4. It says, now the city was large and great, but the people were few therein, and the houses were not builded. And my God put in mine heart to gather together the nobles and the rulers and the people, and that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of them which came up at the first, and found written therein, these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity of those that had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away. And they came again to Jerusalem and to Judah, every one unto his city, who came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Rehemiah. I was doing good. Nehemiah, thank you. Messed me up at first. Nehemiah. Then Mordecai, Bilshan, Mizpareth, Bigvai, Nahum, if you want to say it that way, Baanath. I'm reading two different things at the same time. Baana, all right? The number, I say, of the men of the people of Israel was this. Now, he then goes into a whole bunch more. I got through those. That's all we're doing. All right? If you move over to verse number 66, in verse number 66, it says this: the whole congregation together was 42,360. Now, the difference, you say, well, that's a lot of people. Yeah, but they weren't in the city. These are the ones that they're all over the place, all around that area. But within the city of Jerusalem, there were not many people as there used to be in days of old. Why? The houses were torn down. It was all, the walls were now built, but everything on the inside was in still some rubbles when it comes to dwelling places. And so Nehemiah desired to get the city back to its former glory, get it back to its original purpose. The people, by the way, I remind you, the people, it's not just because we want to have a beautiful city with a whole bunch of people in it. He didn't want to grow the city just because he wanted a big city. And I'll say this for our little town. Little towns better be careful trying to and wanting to be big cities. You might just get what you want. And that's not very good. All right? But it wasn't just to be a big city. It was because within that city resided the house of God. And if you get the people to come back and dwell within the city, they're dwelling closer to the house of God than they are at this current moment. He's wanting to draw them closer, draw them closer. Why? Because meeting with the Lord at the house of God, in the temple, meeting with him would be an easy thing. You're removing, by the way, the closer you get to the house of God, the things of God, the people of God, the easier it is to be a part of it. Now watch. Some people, their heart is so far away from the things of God, they have a hard time, they have an easy time making excuses, have a hard time just doing something for the Lord. Their heart has drifted so far. Now, Nehemiah wants to get the people physically, yes, but he wants to get the people spiritually back close to the Lord again. And one of the best ways to do that is to repopulate within the walls. Everybody that's scattered everywhere, let's bring them back. Let's get them to have a heart's desire to come home. Who belongs back in these places? Who belongs back in these houses? Most of them didn't even know what their heritage was anymore. Most of them have been completely scattered, and they had been infused with people from other countries, and many of them didn't even know. Matter of fact, some of the priesthood didn't even know if they were still of the true priesthood line anymore. They were trying to operate by things, but did not know for sure that they were following, according to the genealogies, what is appropriate. So Nehemiah didn't just go out there and say, hey, listen, let's all you people over there, y'all just come on, move on in. No, he went back and said, let's find out who's who. And let's make sure we restore that which has been lost to families. May I say, there's nothing better when it comes to the house of the Lord, when it comes to being around God's people and the things of God, than to see families have that which has been lost in the family restored. Our children once knew what it was to be in Sunday school, but not anymore. Our children once used to sing the songs, the Bible verse songs, and other songs about the Lord, and you don't hear that anymore. But when you start gathering back and you start getting close again, all of a sudden those things which were lost become restored. And there's a new generation that has a chance now to exhibit and show the effects of getting back to where the family should have never left. And so he wants them to bring back the population to the city so that the city, the house of God, the people themselves can be prosperous. And we see that in these verses here all the way through, leading up to verse number 66. And I'm not going to read any more here as a whole, but you can look in verse number 67, 68, 69, and you'll see all that comes back in. When they come gathered back in, and they come within the city, and they're going to rebuild and regather together as they used to be in proper format and layout, you find they bring with them an entire wealth of prosperity that now the city can benefit from, the house of God can benefit from, and the people themselves will benefit from. So there is a desire for things to be populated and prosperous. As I said, there were many priests that could not even prove their right to be a priest. In fact, the Bible tells us that that group of priests of the people came from a corrupt lineage of marriage between the Israelites and the Gileadites. The people were willing to do what God's word commanded so that the blessing of God could be theirs. They removed them from the priesthood. You mean I can't be a priest? You're not worthy according to what God gave us as strict rules. Sorry, no, you're removed. Well, that's mean. No, that's just getting back to what's right. That was the whole point. We've been doing wrong for so long, we've just accepted it, but wrong is still wrong. It's now time to get back to the narrow way. Time to get back to what God said we were to do. And let's get back, let's cleanse, let's purify, and let's get it back to where it never should have gotten away from. And so they repopulate, but they don't just do it haphazardly. They get things back in order. They know who's who. The priesthood is one of the biggest areas that is affected through this, because now they will find those who are truly qualified. And it's going to affect their worship. It is going to affect their following of God. It is going to affect how they meet with God. Everything that they do is now about to be affected because of this one move to purify, get things right, and get people back on track. The last thing we see is he wanted to see the city provided for. In verse number 70 down to verse number 73, what we see is the work of God can only continue as long as the dedication and sacrifice of God's people continues. And through this, in verse number 70, you see the Tershatha, or the Tershatha, however you want to say it, or the governor. And the governor is one to help provide, but the governor represents those individuals who have much. There's three different categories of people that help provide for the work and provide for the city even after the work is completed. The governor, which is a representation of those that had much. Then you have some of the chief of the fathers in verse number 71. That is those who have plenty. They don't have as much as some others, but they got plenty. You know, they're doing okay. They're not wealthy and rich, but they're doing okay. Even they were giving to help provide for the city. And then in verse number 72, you have the rest of the people, and that is a representation of those that have little. Listen, it doesn't matter if you've got more money than everybody else or you got less money than everybody else. God said and presents to us through this right here that it is the responsibility of every single person to invest in and provide for the work. And not just the work to be initially done, but the work to be maintained and continued for the glory of God. The city had to be provided for. The house of God in the city had to be provided for. The people living in the city had to have some area of provision for them in getting things going. And those that had money, those that were doing just fine, and those who had almost nothing, all were expected to be a part of providing. Because to that which you invest little or nothing, it means little to nothing. You care for that which you've invested in. Therefore, every single person, no matter what their abilities, was to do something. And through all, doing their part. By the way, I'll remind you, not even the richest of them could do it all. Everyone doing their part made the provision for the city a success. Verse number 73, it says, so the priests and the Levites and the porters and the singers and some of the people and Nethinims and all Israel dwelt in their cities. And when the 7th month came, the children of Israel went in their cities. And so all this began to come together. Everything began to really get focused back to where it needed to be. The walls are built, the city's fortified, now it's being repopulated and protected, and it's being provided for with all these, and the blessings of God are beginning to flow. But what's about to happen next becomes the most powerful aspect of all of this work. All that's been done thus far is for the sole purpose of what happens in chapter 8. Chapter 8 is what Nehemiah really wanted to see. Chapter 8 is what all the other prophets and preachers of that day were really wanting to see. Revival. And it took all of this, fighting against the opposition, dealing with the problems internally and externally, dealing with all the situations, and then getting everybody's focus back where it had to be. All the work and all the effort leads to just this one main desire that we'll see in chapter 8 when we get there. I'll tell you this concerning what happened with the provisions. Not everyone gave to the work as another person did. But there were those that did give and made it possible for the work to continue. Not everyone sacrificed equally, but everyone reaped the benefit of the sacrifice that was given. As a whole, it's not how much you can do, it's are you doing what you can? That's the big question. Are you doing what you can? Because everybody together doing what they can and what God directs them to do, that's within their ability, is what gets the work going, keeps the work fueled, and sees the work accomplished. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for tonight. Thank you again for the challenge that we have through your word or through what we see with Nehemiah. Lord, I'm excited about the next chapter that we're going to be looking at. But Lord, I thank you that we've been able to see thus far what it takes to be able to get to a point where God can send revival in the midst of his people. Would you help us to not forget the valuable lessons already learned by watching and seeing what happened with Nehemiah, the people of Israel, and the city of Jerusalem, and the work that was done. Would you help us to have the same heart to do the work that is needed today? We ask it all in Christ's name. Amen. And as we close out tonight, if you would, take your prayer bulletin there, grab somebody around you, and